Okay, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're listening in from. Thank you so much for taking the time here to walk through this webinar here, a tool for economic developers using IMPLAN Cloud. I'm going to give our audience here a few more minutes as they're coming in here, and so if you'll just be patient with us, we will get started here in just a few moments. Thank you. Again, I'm going to wait just another 30 seconds or so before we get started as people are still coming in. Thank you again for taking the time to walk through this webinar. We are going to discuss using using IMPLAN as a guide or tool for our economic developers. Now make sure that everyone can hear me okay. And see the screen okay. So bear with me just for 1 second as I try to present this in full screen mode. My name's Doug Arrington, and I have had the distinct pleasure of working with economic development organizations for the past coming up on the last 5 years here. So I'm excited to be able to walk through a demonstration here, how IMPLAN might be able to be a valuable resource, valuable tool for you all, whether you're actively in economic development work now or just a part of economic development work. As we know, covers an array of different tasks and different challenges, especially these last 2 years. Let me try and reshare a screen. Let's see here. First, we'll go through some housekeeping. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, or you can type them out in the chat box here. If we do not get to them at the end, we will certainly follow up with you and get to them via email after the webinar. So we'd love for this to be as interactive as possible, though. So if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to go into the chat and fire away. Some of the things we're going to cover here, we're going to walk through IMPLAN Cloud, running an impact analysis, a very common type of analysis that a lot of our EDCs, EDOs, EDAs are performing, are simply a expansion of a business. So looking at quantifying the operations, looking at quantifying the construction. We're also going to do and show how I might model two different types of analysis. So looking at similar types of impacts, but different industries, how we can compare that. We're going to walk through some of the underlying data within the IMPLAN Cloud, how that might be of value, and how some of our economic development partners are taking advantage using our underlying data as a value add for their work, answering questions or performing a comprehensive economic strategy. And then lastly, we'll tie it together with just a real life example of Apple's expansion, which was announced last year in Wake County, Greater Raleigh area. Reminder here is when we're looking at IMPLAN here, it's an input-output analysis. And so our direct effects are typically what our user is going to input into the model. And then we allow IMPLAN to quantify those business-to-business expenditures of that direct effect and induced effects, which are where our employees are spending their paychecks within an economy. This is going to be indigenous to each region, each economy, and that's really one of the big value adds that IMPLAN brings. So we'll jump into it here. What is economic development? As we walk through, it's certainly shifted quite a bit since the pandemic, but I wanted to just highlight there's a varying different type of tasks and responsibilities and questions being asked to our economic development organizations around the country. So this is a definition I borrowed from the International Economic Development Corporation. So really it includes a varying range of activities focused mainly on attracting, creating, retaining jobs, fostering a resilient pro-growth tax base in an inclusive economy. So what does that look like? Here are some of the different tasks and different items that our economic development partners are doing. Certainly business retention, business expansion. How do we foster an environment like that? Involved with financing, creating incentives, abatements. What is the right approach to help lure or help keep your area on the map as businesses are looking to expand and move to the area? Workforce development. It's certainly been top of mind for a lot of companies in the last several years. Is what does the labor market workforce development look like? Do we have the right programs alongside these industries and jobs that we're looking to attract and expand to help continue to foster these employees with the right certifications, as well as disaster recovery and resiliency. Certainly that could be the top of mind since 2020 with COVID, is how do we respond and help our businesses react and get the resources they need in a micro environment that may be shifting really quickly. Certainly we saw that in the last several years. So what we're going to get to now is we're going to get into the IMPLAN Cloud application, review just some of the underlying data, walk through an analysis where we're quantifying the construction and operation, as well as look at a comparison of different industries. So I'll pull up the application here. And this is where we go into IMPLAN the application and be able to choose really our region. And it's important once we choose our region is to realize any type of analysis is going to just be considered, we're going to quantify just within that region. So here, for example, we're using Culpeper County. So anything in our results section that's just within Culpeper County. We do have ways, if we want to quantify things outside that region, we can include that, but defining the region is really the first step when running an analysis. We have a few different granularities on geography when we're doing that. We could choose zip codes, counties, MSAs, congressional district, those are federal congressional district, and the state, or any combination of the same geography. If we wanted to reflect a township municipality, we could combine the zip codes. If we wanted to look at reflecting an MSA or certain region of Virginia, I could combine counties or states as well. The two main primary value adds of IMPLAN in terms of economic development organizations, one being the underlying data. What do you mean by that? Well, IMPLAN has about 90 different sources of government data sets that we've really taken a lot amount of time organizing, categorizing this per region. So when we look at going into the data, we're transparent about that data set. We believe that it's valuable for our users to be able to go in and look at the data in order to help make the decisions that are going to impact their regions, their community. And so when we look at, let's say, for example, Culpeper County, we're looking at 2019, we can see what the GDP would be, what the GDP is, the total employment, the population. We kind of get a nice overview. As we scroll down, you can see we can get insight into the industries themselves. IMPLAN has 546 industries. Those are aggregated from a little over 1,100 NAICS codes. And we can also begin to interact with these columns. So I can sort by largest to greatest on, for employment. So what industry is the largest employer, or what is the largest total labor income. So there's a wealth of economic data here that a lot of our economic development partners are going in and using either for research, getting a state of their economy, or answering questions that are being brought up by their stakeholders or constituents or legislators within their region. We can get a little more detailed within our industries as well and see things that might be a little more tricky to pull out from those BLS DEA data sources. Things like breaking out proprietor employment. How many Uber or Lyft drivers do I have versus wage and salary employment? Those are some key differences that can be a little more painstaking when we're looking at pulling that data from our government data sources that we've got for you that are organized. And important that when macro environment changes or potential policy changes, it's important to take note maybe what self-employed of these industries, how these self-employed individuals may be affected by those policy changes. We could also look at, well, what industry provides the biggest production of taxes in our region. Although are not extremely high on our employment, it is going to be an industry we need to pay close attention to because of the provider of taxes to our community. So there's some really interesting types of data that we can begin to gather and begin to understand the uniqueness of your region, of your economy, by just looking at the underlying data. All of this is exportable, so if we wanted to go in and pull this out in Excel or CSV, you're welcome to do so. In addition to our industry level data, we can also get some insight into our occupation data. Certainly our workforce partners, our labor market is shifting very quickly, and it's something that we need to have a pulse on because it's one of the top questions asked when responding to an RFP, when responding to a potential suitor that's looking to expand in our market is, well, what does the labor force look like? We can also use our occupation data. Maybe we want to start and prioritize recruiting or attracting businesses that we know may benefit from having a concentrated occupation by sorting by labor quotient. So we know, for example, there's a high concentration of wood workers. Maybe that helps us prioritize what businesses hire these types of individuals and how to properly communicate and start to market. Our area is a good place for them to expand because of our concentration of that occupation within our region. So you can use this data also as a part of that attraction and recruiting effort. So we can see things like the wage and salary from an employment standpoint, or compensation, or even location quotient. I also have the ability to look at different levels of what's called the standard occupation code. So if I want to look at a little more detailed standard occupation code, I can now do that and really get some insight into the specific occupations at the 6-digit level. In addition to our occupation data, where we can see total wage and salary employment, we can see average pay rates either on an annual or hourly basis. We can also look at a specific occupation within an industry. So if we needed to compare, for example, a welder in an aerospace manufacturing industry versus a welder at a machine shop, we can really hone in on that specific occupation in a specific industry, because those two individuals in that welder example, they're going to have different pay rates, different certifications, different education requirements. So speaking of certification and education requirements, another aspect of our occupation data is going to be what's called core competency. This is the data set from the BLS ONET data. If you've ever tried to pull your ONET data for your region, you know it can be a bit cumbersome. And so here we can really hone in alongside our workforce partners, alongside with building these programs, certification programs of what type of skill sets needed. Here we're looking at Culpeper in at workforce in its totality, but we could also look at a specific industry or occupation from a core competency standpoint, which is simply the knowledge, skills, ability, and education. So they've done a really good job putting some language around these skills and abilities for our occupations. Again, here we're simply just looking at our workforce in Culpeper County. So if I wanted to understand the breakdown of the education of my workforce, here's a great way to look at that. And I could also go in and better understand, say, for example, the hospital industry, or if I need to go a little bit more narrow and look at registered nurses in hospitals, I could look at that occupation specifically in terms of knowledge, skills, ability, and education. So a really great advantages of using IMPLAN's underlying data is having access to the industries, health and the different breakdown there, but also the occupation data. And then lastly, I'll touch lightly on our environmental data. Both the occupation and environmental data was something that IMPLAN's added within the last 2.5 years, so you may not be as familiar with that. That's quite all right. We've got a lot of documentation on our support site around both those data sets. Our environmental data is simply each industry has a coefficient related to its output. And so we're looking at what the EPA has defined as tags, or these different criteria. And so each industry on per dollar of output has a coefficient for each one of these tags. And so we can begin to understand the impact of greenhouse gases in things like renewable power generation and fossil fuel generation. Or if we're out west, we can begin to understand what the difference in industries that are maybe consuming more water than other industries, which are certainly top of mind for some of our communities around the country. So again, this is just the underlying data of our IMPLAN Cloud application. Now what I'm going to go to is just show you the analysis portion within the application. So as I jump to our impacts, this is where our users go and run their analysis, run what we call events in the application to quantify the total economic impact. So for the demonstration here today in the webinar, what we're looking at understanding is what the difference is when we expand a business by 45 employees in the industry business support services. So what we're going to think of there is maybe a call center or something of that nature. And then also doing the same level of employees, so same amount of employees, but in a different industry, warehouse and storage. So here there's several different types of data that I can bring in order to run an analysis. For the demonstration purposes, these are going to be industry employment. We're going to use industry employment. However, it is good to understand and know that there are different types of ways that I can bring data sets to IMPLAN in order to run the analysis. And our last example shows that to a degree of, we want to still quantify the construction of our new building. So once we decide if we're going to incentivize, say, warehouse or call center, we're going to also want to quantify the $10 million construction impact of that. And we're going to do so by using industry output, the cost of construction. We're still using Culpeper County in this example. And so let's go to the results. So once we're in our results, we're going to just look to show and see the difference between the expansion in the call center, the business support service, and warehouse. So here we can see the 45 employees in our direct employment. That's the number we brought into IMPLAN. And then IMPLAN has the labor income already a part of it. You saw that in the underlying data, but here we can quantify, we know what those 45 individuals' total labor income will bring, the value added and output, and then we're going through that ripple effect. Remember, the indirect are going to be those business expenditures and the labor income associated with those employees in the indirect portion. Our induced are going to be where those employees are spending their paycheck. So now that we have 52.3 jobs attributed to the call center, those 52 individuals are going out and spending their paycheck, and on an annual basis, that money spent supports an additional 5.5 jobs in Culpeper County, Virginia. And so you get the total jobs supported, call that 57, almost 58, and a total output of $4.5 million. We also have some fiscal impacts alongside with that. So we know to the county about $52,500 on an annual basis is going to be contributed. So now let's filter and see how the 57, 58 jobs and 4.5 million compare. And so I think in a lot of people's minds, if you're presented with the opportunity of, do we want to allocate or rezone or incentivize this business support center or warehouse, oftentimes we think that the business may be a better option. But what we see, at least in Culpeper County, is if the same 45 input jobs, in this case in the warehousing industry, actually contributes a little bit higher total jobs supported and almost double the total output in our region. Well, why is that? Well, because we're going to have a little bit stronger indirect impact and induced impact, and IMPLAN's helping us quantify those interconnectivity of those industries producing commodities and services and where they're being consumed. And so this is where we can bring data to maybe some of those preconceived notions or ideas on why actually when reviewing the data, the total impact would be double when we're looking at the same type of input with this warehouse example as opposed to the business support service. Not only would it be double for our total output, or about 12 jobs more supported total, but also about $50,000 generated in more taxes to the county. And so this fiscal impact is a big resource in how at least a portion of maybe how abatements and incentives may get discussed and certainly put in place. Is first we need to understand what each project's going to provide, the different jurisdiction, be it state or county or municipality, and then second, using that, help us craft the right competitive incentive package to do so. Now, when we're looking at our results, the other thing that I really like to point out is we can understand how that indirect impact, in this case, we're looking at the warehouse, expansion of the warehouse by 45 employees, how that $1.7 million is distributed by industry. So it's not just the warehouse industry that we can see the impact of, but we can also see, well, here's what's going to that utility provider. And these types of insight and understanding can really help bridge our community, but also resources. We've seen a tremendous amount of utility providers in the past 5-8 years start to partner with our economic development organizations around the country and be a part of the discussion of what an incentive or a rebate may look like. Maybe it's something as simple as having a site, what I'll call site ready from a power standpoint, but we've also seen a lot of utility providers join in the incentive process, offering power rebates or discounts if this certain property or zoning is passed in warehouse, maybe versus the business support service. So just being able to understand and articulate using data what the impact would be to your local utility providers, really helpful, but also now bringing data and seeing if they'd be interested in being part of the incentive or abatement, it can be powerful as well. So we can see a really big difference in what is going to be allocated to the utility, in this case, from a warehouse and storage industry versus the business support service industry. And that is just the business to business expenditure. So as we're looking at the impacts, we can also get the insight for these 45 employees that are expanding in the warehouse, going and looking at, well, what type of jobs will this be? And so if I want to get to the detailed 6-digit standard occupation code from the BLS, we can now better understand what types of jobs and how many of those jobs are a part of the 45 employees. And I can filter on direct to just look at the 45 employees. And this is going to better align my workforce program and efforts, recruiting efforts, and understand as I'm potentially modeling what is what could be used for the space or what these potential projects will look like, we can better understand that on an occupation labor market standpoint as well. So we can understand we're going to have 10 laborers in stock, material handlers, and then we can also go and look at, well, what are those individuals making on an annual or hourly basis? Not only that, but how many of these individuals with this occupation code do we have? Could we use that data to help articulate why our market, our region, is a great place to be expanded upon, because we do have a great supply of that occupation and a competitive pay rate. So here's where we can use some of that data to do so. So we can look at the total impacts or look at the pay rates as well to go alongside those impacts. And I'm going to scroll down to where the majority of those 45 employees were in the 53, 70, 62. And here we can now see the total compensation of that $87,000 annually. So we know what they're making, we know what that staffing matrix of the 45 will look to be, and then we can also see the core competency. What are the knowledge, skills, ability, and education? And again, this really helps. It comes full circle for a lot of our EDCs, EDOs, is understanding first the breakdown of what the workforce makeup is from the core competency data, and then aligning that with the programs that you're trying to foster and support, or your technical trades and certifications and community colleges, making sure they're aligned accordingly with what is the education required. And so here we're looking at the 45 employees in the warehouse industry and how that is required from an education standpoint, what this occupation breakdown will look like. So great way to partner and better understand not only the occupations, but the training and education required of those occupations, and partner with those community colleges and workforce programs you all have going on. We do have environmental impacts from the expansion of these 45 employees in the warehouse. And here's where we're able to quantify this using our EPA's extended input-output data set here. We can now get a better understanding of what the total greenhouse gases which are emitted are the total water use of this project. And we could compare both the warehouse and the business services. There's certain items that are more prevalent to you all's community, you all's region. But this is a great start that the EPA and IMPLAN has begun to bridge these industries and the dollar of output, what that represents in terms of environmental impacts. There's some additional insight which we'll cover briefly looking at the Apple project, but in our taxes, we can get some more detail as well. And just to show you the different regions of where those taxes are quantified. So we know that the tax contribution is different at these different geographic jurisdictions. The federal, we have insight into our county taxes. We can look at the sales and property tax. We do have the breakdown of the 9 different households by annual income. Our sub-county are going to be our municipalities and townships, certainly some special tax districts, and then our state fiscal impact. And again, we can download any of these tables that is interested to us. So we're now going to jump back into the presentation and go through the Apple discussion here. So last year, Apple announced that it's expanding its operations in Wake County, the greater Raleigh area. And what we'll do is just walk through how you might quantify that. So here was the little thumbnail from the announcement of this. It picks the triangle, which is Raleigh, for all you all outside of North Carolina, billion-dollar campus, thousands of high-paying jobs. And so the inputs we could use would be the number of jobs and the cost of construction. So here within IMPLAN, the region that I'm looking at is the MSA of Raleigh. Our input is the employment, the industry that would most represent the workers, and the value of the total workers going into this being expanded by. So the 3,000 into custom computer programming. And then we also want to quantify the construction, the 150 million that these individuals will be working within. And so you begin to see the real large economic impact of bringing this many jobs of this pay rate, in addition to the construction and investments Apple's making, to the tune of the total economic impact being over $1 billion and supporting over 7,800 jobs in the region. You can also begin to see the total state or county fiscal impacts here of this expansion. And this is some of the key data analysis that we wanted to bring to light and show our users here, is that you can begin to use when creating those incentives and understand what is our rate of return, even with certain incentives. What's a competitive incentive to put together? But first we need to know what's being contributed back to our region from this expansion, so we can get some insights into the sales tax, our total fiscal impact of the state, that $33.2 million. And that's really when we begin to understand what kind of value add IMPLAN can bring, looking at the economic impact and the fiscal impacts and occupation impact of these projects. So I do have a question here that came in, and I'll read for everyone. And maybe what I'll do is I'll save these just as I recap here to the very end. We're almost there, but thank you for interacting and participating by asking a question. Really, just to recap, kind of the main value added benefits of IMPLAN specific to our economic development organizations are twofold. The underlying data, having access to data set from the BEA and BLS and additional data sources that are categorized and specific to your region. You can export that data, you can manipulate that data and use for research and answer questions to your constituents or RFPs. And then of course the analysis engine of IMPLAN Cloud, the ability to model different scenarios to be able to quantify what those economic impacts will be, even if it's total output or the fiscal impact, or even understanding the occupational matrix of that project that you're looking to quantify. So we can compare different types of analyses, different types of scenarios. We could model policy changes, and we can just better understand what that total ripple effect is using economic impact analysis of these projects into our region. We can also use it to prioritize, well, what areas is our community really strong in from an economic standpoint? What data points might I bring to use as an attraction or recruiting effort? What types of industry should we be incentivizing and how much? Those types of different insights can be key to creating a resilient, healthy community and economy as you all are making decisions for what best serves your region. So again, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat box. We'll happily go through that, and I'll begin to answer some of those now. So here's a question from Sam. Is it really an all else equal comparison if you're running both industry expansion events simultaneously? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to perform two different analyses on the expansion event, include each one and compare those results? Utilizing that event filter, which you saw me toggle on, the results actually are going to be separate. And so we can then have one project screen, but compare these 2 different, 3 different, 20 different events or analyses ran. And that's really a nice benefit within the application, is I can filter by multiple different types of items, which gives me more flexibility in the in the event building impact screen, as we call it? Sam, great question. Thank you for asking that. Another question here is, when is your 2021 data going to be released? Great question. Within the next 3 weeks, any active subscriber in IMPLAN will automatically get the 2021 update data year. And currently our subscribers have access to data years 2001 to 2020. As you saw, my default is still 2019 because using 2020 is a very specific data year, which reflects more of COVID than what in this example I was reflecting, which is modeling something for next year. Here's another question. Should the cost of heavy machinery, furniture, that would be manufacturing out of the state, of geography be of interest, be excluded from direct impacts if known? Yes, if you know that it'll be sourced from outside the study region, you do not need to include it. Nice benefit of IMPLAN is our construction sectors do not automatically include FF&E for that exact reason. Great question. Great insight there. Here's another question is, can you also look at spillover effects in this example in Culpeper County? What impacts may be happening in my surrounding counties? The answer to that is yes, you absolutely could, using what's called multi-regional input-output analysis. A little bit more advanced, but it's simply just choosing additional regions to have the analysis engine quantify those spillover impacts while keeping the interdependence of your Culpeper County, which means simply we're just not going to aggregate. Eric, how many years do your results cover, the one that we just ran? Great question, Eric. So everything in IMPLAN where we're looking at those results is simply going to just be in an annual time frame. And so if we wanted to input multiple different, let's look at it from a construction standpoint, different levels of construction, say year 1, 2 million, year 2, 3 million, year 4, 10 million. We could do that in our impact screen and set those up in different data years and put those different inputs. However, if we're just looking at quantifying things with the same input, in this example, 45 jobs over 5 years, we could simply just export our results and use that on an annual basis or multiply by the number of years we want to reflect that summary. The only number we wouldn't is total jobs. We're going to assume those work year over year. Another question here. Do you include soft costs in total construction budget? Yes, you should include all hard and soft costs while not including the FF&E cost we were just discussing. A great way to show that what is included in the construction impacts here is if I were to just look at our construction impact and I filter by indirect impacts, we can begin to see those what I'll call soft costs here. And so here we can see what the design and engineering firm is going to be receiving, or truck transportation, etc. Great question. Well, that looks like we've covered most of the questions here. Again, if not, we absolutely will be reaching out to you. Thank you again for taking the time to join our webinar. If you'd like a demonstration using your own project within your own region to further understand how IMPLAN might be of value, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to set that up for you. You can just go to our website, implan.com. There's an area to request a demo, or implan.com/demo, or feel free to email us at sales@implan.com. We'd love to be able to walk through a personal demonstration with you. We also do want to mention our support site here. It's a free resource for any of you that might be interested. Support.implan.com. It's 24/7 resource, so you can find recordings of previous Link and Learn sessions or other webinars. You can also register for upcoming webinars that we may be having on schedule on the calendar. But you can further explore our items like data, what data sources specifically, or methodology, look at examples, as well as there will be a recording of this sent out to you all here momentarily. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to our webinar here, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to being in touch with you.